Hi and welcome to Peter Erickson's opinions on server spec. So before we start, I'd like to ask a few basic questions about any technology I'm looking at or using. The first one is, what can we use it for? Well, server spec builds on top of RSpec, which is a testing framework. The kind of testing we can do with server spec is all around what we call infrastructure testing. So things like services and packages, status on individual machines, are they installed, are certain ports listening, that sort of thing. But why would we want to use it? Well, I can think of a few good use cases. One is you are approaching a new system and you're not entirely sure what it's composed of and what to expect for it. You might write a server spec suite to basically flesh out the kind of assumptions you can make about it. What kind of things are running on each machine, what ports the system's listening on, things like that. This is a good learning exercise, but it's also good because as you build up that suite, you can also use that to keep verifying the system moving forward as you make changes and refactors to it. The second use case I can think of is basically to start writing an RSpec suite at the start of a project, just so you can catch regressions extremely early. And catching regressions as in things that used to work and don't work anymore is one side of it. Giving yourself and other people confidence to evolve the system, knowing that if you break a part of it that you're not currently focused on, the spec suite will detect that. So the second question I like to ask myself about any sort of new technology is, where does it come from? Well, RSpec, which is a BDD, Behavioral Driven Development Test Framework for Ruby, was started around about 10 years ago. And ServerSpec itself, which is built on top of RSpec, was started just a few years ago. So if we have a look at the ServerSpec repo, this is it here, we can see that quite a few commits, 100 odd contributors, lots of forks and stars. So it is quite a busy project. If we go to a checkout of the project, which I made earlier, we can then verify how old it is and the original author, things like that. Scroll right to the end. So it was started in 2013 by Gosuke Miyashita, and the first thing we're going to cover is the ServerSpec init tool, which can be used to create like a skeleton ServerSpec layout, either standalone or adding to an existing repository. There's a few things we need to do before we can run ServerSpec init, including how do we installing ServerSpec. That's also another question I like to ask, because we can learn a lot from how complex it is to install a piece of software. So I'm going to go to a repo I have which contains the Vagrant environments that I use for these talks. I'm just going to verify that nothing has been changed. I recently did a Vagrant up just for one of the boxes, so we'll just use one today, and that box is there's Ubuntu Xenial box. So just to verify that it's up and running, we'll do a Vagrant SSH Ubuntu Xenial. Alright, good. Now, how do we install ServerSpec? Well, it's a Ruby dependency. It's a Ruby library. Now, right now, I don't have a gem file in this repo. A gem file controls, what Ruby libraries you might need for a project and the specific version that they can or may not be locked to. So let's get that started. We'll create a file called gemfile. Also gem ServerSpec. I'm not too concerned about the version, so we're not going to pin it to a version right now. With that, if we have bundle installed, we should be able to do a bundle install. But just to verify that we have bundle install, I'll show you how we would usually install it. We would go gem, install bundle. Bundler, sorry, bundle is something different. Now, in a lot of distributions now, if you install Ruby, it will also install Ruby Gems as well. Ruby Gems isn't part of the core of Ruby, but it's so commonly used that the use of Ruby and Gem is kind of synonymous with each other. If you don't have Gem installed, then there's maybe a package on your system called Ruby Gems or similar. Now that we've installed Bundler and we have our gem file, we should be able to do bundle install. You'll notice that a gemfile.lock file was created, and this file contains the exact versions of all the dependencies. The version of service spec, we haven't pinned it to any particular version, so it's just grabbed the latest, and then depending on the dependencies that service spec have stated, the rest of the dependencies may be the latest, or they may be fixed to a certain version. And you'll notice that service spec can't work without Ruby, without RSpec rather. Alright, so now that we have service spec installed, we should just be able to do service spec init. And this is going to ask us a few questions, like are we on Unix or Windows? Unix. What backend? Yes, we could actually run some suite against our local host, but that's not what we're going to do today, so we're going to say SSH. And we're also going to use the built-in support for Vagrant for service spec init. If you're accessing machines which aren't provisioned using Vagrant, then you may need to install a plugin or modify spec helper directly, but I'll cover that a bit later on. Say we want to auto-configure. Now we're only going to target one host this time. Alright, so service spec init has created a spec helper, which I'll talk about a little bit later, a rake file. Rake file is just the Ruby equivalent of make, basically. A .rspec, which just sets up some default parameters for rake and service spec, rspec rather, and a spec directory which holds our specifications or examples of what we're going to test. Now it has created a sample spec, which is, we could run it, but it's not going to work because it's checking for just random stuff. So let's have a look at this. This is what the Ruby DSL for RSpec and service spec looks like. Now we don't actually have HTTPD installed, so what I'm going to do is just strip this right down, and we're going to check for a single service called PostgreSQL. We don't care what the host is, the operating system rather, and that's it. So our service spec suite at present is going to check that the service PostgreSQL is enabled and running. We can run rake spec now, and we should be able to verify that. Alright, so you can see from the output that the service PostgreSQL should be running, should be enabled, should be running. There's 2 examples in total, 0 failures. If these had been failures, they'd be red. So you can see that the output is fairly readable. This is referred to as the documentation output. It's not particularly machine parsable, but we will talk about that a little bit later on. Now, if we were to do a rake T, this would show us a list of rake targets. When we run rake by itself, it's defaulting to the spec Ubuntu Xenial target. But if we had other machines that we were testing, then they would come up as separate targets, rake targets, and that would allow us to run parts of the test suite individually rather than having to run the whole test suite each time. So the next thing we're going to talk about are resource types. Now we've seen the service resource type, so I won't go through all of them, but we'll go through just a couple. I think an obvious one is command. What you can do with command is you can run a shell command and you can check things like its exit status and standard output and error, either an exact match or a regular expression match. Another one we can look at is, say, cron. Perhaps you want to verify that a cron job is present and hasn't been removed. So you can do something like describe cron should have entry blah. Fairly straightforward. We'll look at a few more. We can check that your system has a Docker container running. So you might say we want the Docker container focused curry running, and then you can check various things about the configuration. For example, this is checking network mode being bridged, and here we're checking for a volume. A file is one you'll probably use a lot. It's just simply checking that a file is present. It's a file or directory, or it simply exists, and certain other characteristics about a file, including a regular expression about what the file contains. Useful stuff. You'll notice that most of these are fairly low level, so when it comes to doing checking things which are more specific to our particular environment, then we might need to roll up our sleeves and actually create our own resource types. Okay, thank you for listening. In the next talk about service spec, we will first cover custom types, and then we'll move on to some other semi-advanced topics. If you found this video useful, please give it a like. If you would like to be notified of further videos, then you're welcome to subscribe to the channel. Okay, thank you.